Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabad House of Dalmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service, jbiztechvalley.com, and as you can see here, he is now columnist for the Jewish Press.
And I'm having a lot of fun with all of those assignments. As I talk about how government relates to the Jewish community, or doesn't, as the case may be. And one of the pieces of government is as law and order. We always like to have the district attorneys from the Capital District on. And with us today is Kate Hogan, who's the Warren County District Attorney. Welcome to the Jewish View.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
It's so nice to have you here. It really is very special. I really appreciate you coming down from Lake George. Is your...
That's what I was going to ask. Just, I have been up to Warren County, but just get a little of the major cities or the boundaries in general.
Well, I live in Warren County, the most beautiful county of all 62. It's 938 square miles. It has Glens Falls as the city in the county, and Lake George, which we all know is the queen of America's lakes. There's a lot of great tourist destinations, and tourism is the #1 industry for our community. So the census population is approximately 69,000 people, but in the summer it goes up to 2 million.
Really, that many?
So as a DA, it's very challenging because your staff has to combat all of the ancillary things that happen when people come into your community.
In that regard, you're very much similar to Greene County.
Correct.
Where they boom in the summertime in the Catskills there. But with Warren County, I got to tell you, in Lake George, we have a summer minion where they put up, I forgot the name of the street that they have it on, but they put up a big tent, and you have all these observant Jews coming down from the mountains. And you
going
see
up from the Catskills,
and
down.
from the Adirondacks, you know, and they're camping and they're doing all that, but they come for the minion, and it's bloody something.
Bloody Pond Road.
That's
right.
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's where the tent is, and it's just up from like maybe Memorial Day or July 4th through the end of
Labor Day.
Memorial Day to Labor Day.
You know, they say they actually, just to back you up, I saw that Lake George is the most beautiful spot in the whole United States.
Wasn't
I
that?
actually saw that, and you know, it's incredible then. You know, in your own backyard, or it's right your front yard over here.
It is my front yard, and we're very lucky to be able to have access to it. And for anyone who's in love with Lake George like I am, I don't need a survey to tell me, but it's a really great reminder, and Rabbi, I'm glad you mentioned it. It's a really great reminder because people around locally may have forgotten about Lake George, and it's only a day trip. You hop in the car on a sunny Saturday, or even better, go in the week when all the tourists are not necessarily there in full volume, and you can have a great day in absolute beauty, and you can be home that night. So it's a good destination.
When did you become DA? When were you first elected?
I was elected in the fall of 2001 and took office January 1, 2002. In fact,
so how many times have you won re-election? 3 times?
I'm in my 4th term.
4th term, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But I ran, the primary day was 9/11 and had to be put back. So it was a very, obviously, heartbreaking time for our nation.
That must be challenging, though, but you think tourism, I mean, what kind of crimes are you dealing with? I mean, you know, you get teenagers, a little drunk, maybe a little drugs. I mean, I don't know, you know. So
unfortunately, our community has been hit with the heroin epidemic, like many communities. And even, yeah, it is, Rabbi. It's very, very heartbreaking. So we have, we've built a collaborative group called Hometown versus Heroin. I don't know if you recall, the Look magazine named Glens Falls, New York, Hometown USA after World War II when the GIs were coming home. And they just did a feature on Glens Falls back in that time on what it was like to come home to a typical town in America. So the name Hometown versus Heroin was captured because of that connection. And it really is. It's a scourge and a crisis across our nation, but even in small rural places like Warren County, we have a real heroin epidemic.
And one of the, you know, so you talk about the beauty, but you deal with the seedy side of what goes on, you know, the negative, the nasty you know, how, and you said that you're there for what, 15 years now?
Mm-hmm.
So does it grate on you? Does it get to you? I mean, you seem so cheerful and so nice and happy, but it must, you know, you don't take it home with you, I guess.
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that there's good and evil. And in every case that I handle, I see a lot more good than evil, because I see the nurse who treated the patient who is my victim. I see the police officer who is working on the case. There's a whole bunch of people that are all doing good to combat that one person who's doing evil. Last week, I'm handling a case right now where it's the homicide of a 22-day-old baby.
Oh, I know.
And you really can't imagine anything more evil than that. And yet, despite how awful that is, I am absolutely so impressed and blown away by the efforts of every member of law enforcement that worked on that case, and every member of the medical staff, both at Glens Falls Hospital and Albany Medical Center. And so it reinvigorates your faith in humanity, that there's more good than evil.
Is that going to be plea bargained out?
The case has just begun. An indictment has been filed, and I'm not permitted to speak about a case while it's pending.
Oh, shucks. I thought I'd get you.
Yeah.
Okay, you knew this. Okay.
You want a scoop? He's our newspaper reporter.
Because no, but I'm just, how much, we watch Law and Order SVU, and you know, how much of your cases get plea bargained out as opposed to go to
Well, right now
trial?
I have an ADA who's trying a case, and it's a sexual abuse of a child. This is Crime Victim Rights Week, and so we just had a breakfast this morning where I gave a Courage Award to a child who had to testify in one of those cases. Those cases typically, if you have a really egregious fact pattern, unfortunately those cases typically go to trial because that child is the only witness to it. And so those are cases where the number we're asking for is a lot higher than what the defendant is willing to take.
When you say the number, you mean years in prison?
Correct.
Okay.
So, and you know, that goes based on the record of the defendant, the fact pattern, and the ability of the witness, either a child victim or an adult victim. It's a very arduous process going through trial.
Now, I went down I grew up in Brooklyn, and I happened to be down there visiting.
I started in the Brooklyn DA's office.
Did you, under Liz Holtzman? Or?
Liz Holtzman hired me.
There you go, I guessed it, there you go. Figured the timing, okay. So Ken Thompson is the DA in Kings
Correct.
County, and he was having a community forum in Coney Island, and I asked him, and he had all of his bureau chiefs there. It was like a long line. I didn't know who was doing work in the office, but it was at night. And I said to the woman who heads up SVU, Special Victims Unit, is the show similar to what you deal with in your office? And she goes, except for the shortened time frame, yes.
It is.
What's
striking about these TV shows is they're actually training jurors about direct examination and cross-examination. It is more truncated, obviously, and you know,
like from start to finish, when they put the dates up, it's like a week.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So you know.
But it does show that the different responsibilities
Yes.
and expectations of both police and prosecutors. And while we work hand in glove, it's not, you know, my duties and responsibilities are different than that of the sheriff. And so, you know, he's to conduct the investigation and establish that there's probable cause. We work in collaboration on these investigations. But there's sometimes when we'll have a conversation and he'll say, well, I want you to charge more. I want you to charge this crime or that crime. And I always pull out the penal law, because ultimately we're not controlled by what we want. We're controlled by what the law permits us to do. So, you know, I'm a closet nerd, and many people say it's not so closeted. You know, you read the statute, and whatever those elements are, you hustle and you work to get every ounce of forensic evidence, whether it's DNA. Cell phones are a treasure trove of evidence, computers. Those forensic analysis often allow us to build such a strong case that we can avoid having the victim have to testify. So it is the SVU model, the police being the first half, the prosecutor being the second half, is very much how it is handled.
And the judge in between figuring out whether the warrant was, Miranda rights were sworn properly.
Correct.
Or this was done properly. I mean, the judges get in the middle of it too, as far during the process.
Correct.
I guess, so.
Correct.
Because they're always lecturing the district ADAs about the law enforcement people didn't do their job right.
Well, and
So.
to be quite honest, I don't watch Law and Order SVU. My girls watch it all the time, and my son is not as interested in it. He's only 13. But I've watched episodes of it, but I don't want to, when you asked how do you stay energetic and recharged, it's by not watching stuff like that when you're not at the office. But I think that it's very important that in our community, I believe that our police officers are very well trained and extremely professional and extremely knowledgeable on the law. And I think it's important for the public to have confidence in the criminal justice system and know that if a member of law enforcement does something that's not appropriate, that there is the independent review of a judge who's going to say, I'm suppressing this statement and it's not coming in. So I think that's another asset for the public to understand the criminal justice system.
What's your staff and how many different bureaus and divisions do you have?
So as I said, I started in the Brooklyn DA's office.
So you know what size could be.
And I was one of 67 in my class, and I was one of 600 ADAs.
600
ADAs
wow.
in one county. Now, Brooklyn has a population of 4 million, and I started in 1988, and it was the height of the crack epidemic. So in 1990, the Brooklyn homicide was over 1,100 in Brooklyn alone. And last year we were south of 400 citywide. So New York City was a completely different place than it is today. And it was a much more dangerous place.
Did you have to plea bargain a lot of the cases out in Kings County?
It's very funny you should ask that. My husband and I, my husband was another Brooklyn ADA, and we got married, and it's 25 years. We used to sit.
Loving the DA's
yeah, it would make a good. That would make a good sitcom. But we would sit on the dock. My family has a house on Lake George. We would sit on the dock, being Brooklyn ADAs, and reading what people were pleading to in Warren County. And we would say, why are they pleading to that? Why don't they take it to trial? The plea bargaining is a necessity in the criminal justice system. There's no way you could try all these cases.
Because the courts would be backlogged tremendously
for years and years and years. So the Brooklyn plea offer, by the sheer volume of cases, is lower than a Warren County plea offer. And I use that to my advantage because oftentimes the drug dealers are coming up from Brooklyn. And I will say to the defense attorney, tell your client he's not in Brooklyn anymore. It's not going to be a filings basement offer. And that's a deterrent that I want to make sure I'm communicating to those New York City drug dealers. If you come up to Warren County, you're going to get a different plea offer. And you may think I'm Genghis Khan, but it's the luxury I have by having a smaller caseload. It sends a clear message because they're perpetrating the plague of drugs for profit. And
how many ADA, what's your office? How many?
I have 6 ADAs.
6 as opposed to 600.
Correct. I have 3 part-time investigators. I have 5 support staff. And I have 2 crime victim specialists.
And you don't have a PR guy?
No, I don't have a PR.
No,
yeah.
You don't have a public information officer. You're it. You're the face of the bureau.
I answer the phone when it rings. If I'm walking by and the phone rings, and I'm often asked, Kate, why are you answering the phone? And I said, because it was ringing. You know, like it's a very, what you see is what you get. We're small but scrappy. And honestly, I would put our office in terms of trial talent against any office in the state.
How many bureaus and divisions and specialties do you break out your?
So what we do is, I think that it's important to have a narcotics special. My first assistant, Jason Carasone, is in charge of the narcotics. The reason that's important is because you need to know who the players are, and there's a network, and you need to have institutional knowledge of who's coming in and out of that network.
Can I tell you, just you said before the heroin epidemic, and that's why you connected narcotics. What percentage would you say of crimes are drug or drug related? The person needs a fix, so he's going to rob the drugstore at the. So it's robbery.
If you include alcohol as a drug,
Yes.
if you include alcohol as a drug and you include our DWIs, I would say that it's at least 50% of our caseload. At least.
So continue on with the
Right.
bureau, with your first assistant.
So I think that's my first assistant. And then I also believe it's very important to have sex crime specialized, because you need to have you need to be forensically trained on how to interview a child victim. And I created a child advocacy center in Glens Falls that serves both Warren and Washington counties, so that kids who are victimized don't have to go to a police station or a DA's office, which is very institutionalized and would have an adverse impact on their willingness to come forward. This is a standalone building. It's kid-friendly. The kids can go into a room, the child can go into a room that has kid-friendly decorations in the furniture, and then we can interview them and record it so that can be presented to the grand jury, as opposed to making the child go in front of a grand jury.
Okay.
Domestic violence is another area that we have a DV court in Glens Falls, and so I want someone who is specifically trained. And then I have a DWI prosecutor, because that's a very, in Brooklyn, when someone was drunk, they could take a cab, they could take the subway. There's a lot of people making that mistake of driving drunk in Brooklyn is less frequent per capita. In our region, there's no subway. It's harder to get a cab. So unfortunately, DWI is a very serious crime that people commit with regularity.
And so those are the four.
Those are the four areas where I have specialties. And
now, where does elder abuse go in? Where do you put
well, that's in the domestic violence. Yeah, the special. My DV ADA that handles Glens Falls City Court works with my sex crimes victims, special victims. In elder abuse, it is. I did a panel. I organized a panel this fall to raise the awareness for our elders, because it is just such the financial crime component is something that is really heartbreaking. We're fortunate because in this budget, as you may know, there's been a lot of money put in, and it's for multidisciplinary teams on elder abuse, so that to prove those financial crimes, when you have a senior that's been financially victimized by a caregiver or a family member, you need an accountant. And these multidisciplinary teams will be regionalized, but in small counties like mine, being able to have an accountant to be able to look at those cases can make the difference between bringing the charge and proving it and not being able to bring the charge.
I might be redundant in this, but the care center, was that the child?
Yeah, that's the
center?
Child
That's
Advocacy Center.
where you interview the kids and that?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I had thought.
So we have
And then you also have the ignition interlock, a separate, on your website, a separate button for that, so you have a program?
So when I was president of the DA's Association in 2009 through 2010, and during that time...
You got rave reviews, by the way.
Well, that's very kind to say. During that time, we advocated very strongly for ignition interlock. And this is a mechanical little device that they put on the car so that someone who is going to operate the car has to blow into a device. And if you've had alcohol, it refuses, it will not allow you to turn the car on. So for those people who are chronic offenders, it prohibits them from actually driving while they're intoxicated, and thereby saves scores of lives. So it's a tremendous asset for us. It actually reduces DWI recidivism rate, and it saves lives. And DWI fatality is something that we still contend with much too much regularity.
I go camping up in 13th Lake,
Oh.
which is right on the Hamilton border, but it's in Warren County.
You're the last left in my county.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. Indian Lake is right over the border in Hamilton, and but 13th Lake, I mean, it's so remote, they didn't stop naming them, they number them.
Yes,
You know?
that's exactly right.
And we have 9 campgrounds, and it's first come, first serve. It's a DEC-run campground, and it's just absolutely, phenomenal. It's at the base of Gore Mountain. It's just phenomenal.
And do you ski Gore in the winter?
No, I snowboard more than ski.
Okay.
I think the arms and the legs don't kind of move as much, in coordinated fashion.
I am
as much
so
as the
happy.
snowboarding,
So Rabbi, you see, Mark appreciates the full beauty of our county all year round.
I do.
It's really beautiful.
In fact, there's a rabbi locally who rents a cabin in the winter, and 13th, I went up to see him one time, and 13th Lake was frozen over, and we actually walked on water. We were walking all over the place. Places that I use a boat during the summer, I was walking. It was like amazing.
Isn't it? Have you been to Lake George recently, Rabbi?
Yeah, a few years now. You have to get out there even more. As I know what you're
That's
saying, when I go, I go.
That's another trip. we have to
Mark
take.
and I are always, all the guests,
So
they come on up.
you call me before you come up, and I will give you the 50-cent tour.
All right.
Okay.
It's absolutely gorgeous.
Now, I do also go boating or canoeing or kayaking, canoeing with a gentleman from Schenectady who goes to the northern part of Lake George, and then we canoe down into the islands and stuff.
Into the Narrows.
Yeah, and we have a wonderful day.
So you put in Hague?
He drives, and
Okay.
I just go with him, and I just know it's further than I ever wanted to go. But they have like the lily ponds and
Correct.
the green lily ponds in the water and stuff, and then as we get further into the lake, that all disappears, and, they have one of the mountains, one of the islands rather, has a store, a little store.
It's the Rangers, the
That's
Rangers store.
Rangers, yeah, okay. So we.
Green Island.
So
Yeah,
we
it's
stop
it's
there,
beautiful.
We have our own lunch, and we stop there, and we eat, and then we go on. So he's got it all planned. He knows the routes. I am just going, I have to row, but but it's wherever he wants to take me. So it's just, it is beautiful. It's absolutely gorgeous, yes.
And it's still, at the end of our dock, if you put a quarter in, you can still tell whether it's heads or tails. So the beauty of Lake George, it's a spring-fed lake, and it does get incredibly cold in the winter, which I think is good for the purity of the water.
Oh, yeah.
But it's still a lake where people can drink the water, and in this day and age, I think that may be one of the reasons we got to the top of the list of being most beautiful, because it is the most pure.
All right, I'm going to take a chance, and I'm going to ask you, do you ever do the polar bear plunge?
No.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I am not certifiable.
I thought you
The
were.
the earliest I've ever been in Lake George is March 23rd.
Oh, okay.
And
It must be still pretty cold. Mark.
it was still cold. It was still very.
Water heats, it's warmer in October, even though the air temperature, but it takes time for the water to.
It holds its
cool.
heat through the season beyond. Actually, September is a beautiful time of the year to
Yeah.
come to Lake George.
With the foliage and everything.
Well, it's still warm,
Right.
as you indicate, and the tourists are gone after Labor Day. So you get all the beauty without all the people.
Tell us about your C-SPAN appearance.
Cy Vance and
Why
I.
you?
Yeah, Cy Vance and I are friends, and he
He's
wa-
the Manhattan DA.
He's the Manhattan DA. He was asked to be on this book show, and he wasn't able to make it. So he called me and said, "Would you fill in for me?" And I said, "Sure." And
Well, you went all the way down to Manhattan? for
I
that, or
had to be down there for
something?
another
All right,
meeting.
Okay.
But I go to New York I'm on the Sentencing Commission, the Justice Task Force. I'm in New York regularly for meetings.
Is it determinant sentencing?
Well, the sentencing, Chief Judge Lippman created the Permanent Commission on Sentencing, and it's to continually review and say, are our sentencing guidelines appropriate? Can they be streamlined? And so now the concept is to migrate the indeterminate sentences to determinate sentences.
Because that was going on for 30, 40 years now.
Could you explain what that is? I mean, a little bit, I don't know, and I'm sure my viewers don't know either.
Thank you. You don't want to talk inside, inside baseball. So right now, if you commit a violent felony, it is a determinate sentence. So the range would be on a B felony, a minimum of 5 years, a maximum of 25 years, and it would be whole or half. So your sentence would be 7 years or 12 and a half years, and then you would have post-release supervision. The indeterminate sentences, let's say grand larceny. The grand larceny fourth, your sentence could be 1 to 3. It could be 1 1/3 to 4. It could be, grand larceny third. Those are indeterminate sentences. And the concept behind changing it to determinate sentences is to allow everyone, both the defendant and the victim and the court and Department of Corrections, everyone to know exactly what your sentence is. And it's who knows whether it will ever go anywhere, but it is now being really critically looked at.
I wanted to
It's
ask
through the assembly meaning. I mean, it's got to be law, or I mean,
you would have to change the law, and so it would have to go through both, obviously, the Assembly and the Senate.
But just one more thing, one of my 10 jobs is I do visit Jewish prisoners, and one guy, I never heard a sentence, he had 5 years to life. I never heard of such a sentence. Usually these guys are, if it's a real crime, 20 years to life, but it was a drug charge.
Well, tell her what prisons you go to, because you may be in a Comstock.
I go to Comstock.
Oh,
yeah,
you do?
I do. I go up there for the Jewish holidays, before the Jewish holidays, and
That's in Warren County.
yeah,
No, it's in Washington County.
Washington, but it's right up there. Yeah, I got to pass Lake George and then keep going up from, keep on rolling over there. I always say it's interesting. You say it's beautiful up there, because sometimes you look around the prison. If you can look outside the walls and the barbed wire, wow, it's a beautiful scenery over there. It is in a lot of these places.
So do you go up and are you up there for Passover too?
I don't go on the holidays, because we don't drive on the holidays. But
right.
before Passover, before the holidays, to give the inmates a little bit of a
Manish Tana Halayla Hazer Makol Halaylot Shabakol Halayla.
There you go.
I know the first question.
pretty good.
Not bad for an Irish girl, huh?
I'm saying I didn't expect that
How
over
did you
here.
come up with to know that?
I had a friend who invited me to her home for the Seder, and they let me ask the first question, and I learned it. Manish Tana Halayla Hazer Makol Halaylo
You probably know more than half the Jewish
Yeah,
people. I hate to say that.
So I learned that, and this is actually a funny story. Mr. Cutler, Maury Cutler, he's Bruce Cutler's dad. He's a 16 Court Street attorney. He came in, and we were before Judge Goldman. And he said, Miss Hogan, may I have 2 more weeks to file my motions? And he always wanted more time. So I turned to my friend Judy Kirschenbaum and I said, Manish Tana. And Judge Goldman said, Miss Hogan, approach the bench. And he said, I didn't know you were. And I said, oh, you didn't know about my mother? And he said, no. I heard Hogan. I thought Irish. You want to date my son? And I said, no, I'm a shiksa.
That's a good one.
I have one serious question to ask you about, because we've asked other DAs about this who've been on the show. Raise the age. So I hate to go from joking to something serious, because I always like to end on a light note, but I forgot to ask you earlier. What's your position on raise the age?
My position on raise the age is, if you're going to migrate these cases to family court, you've got to make sure that family court is functioning and can handle them. No one wants to label a 16 or a 17-year-old as a criminal. You have to really do something serious to be able to get a felony and end up in state prison. So the population of people that we're actually talking about is a very, very small population. And what these teenagers did to end up in state prison is very, very, very serious. So if you're going to change the accountability for those violent offenders who at a very young age were very violent, you've got to make sure that you're going to a forum in the family court where it is, has the resources and accountability. And right now, I don't think the family courts are funded in the way that they can handle this.
So you would vote no if you were in the legislature at this point?
I would say I want to see, I would have them in a different housing as they are in executive order, and I would not vote to raise the age without knowing what the plan is. Okay. So I can't say yes or no depending on what they show me.
So Hudson Correctional Facility in Columbia County is where these 16, 17-year-olds are going to be segregated, and so they won't be coupled with, you know, older, more felonious inmates who may have a life sentence. So in that concept, is that okay?
You know, the proof is always in the pudding. And so the concern is that you're making young kids become worse by whom they're associating with in prison. So let's try this and let's see if there's a rehabilitative component to it. I'm a big believer in, for nonviolent felonies, I like getting rehabilitation as opposed to incarceration. So we have a very active drug treatment court. Anyone who is in the system because of addiction, I want to treat the addiction and not have you warehoused. If you're in prison at that young age, we have youthful offender, we have drug treatment courts. Every DA is trying to divert those young kids from prison. So if you're in prison at that young age, it means that you've done something that's very, very serious. And getting to the root of why a young person would do that is a complicated matter. And I think that at least segregating them out and making it so that they're not influenced by older inmates would be one step in protecting their future.
All right, we're out of time, but it was very informative, and you know, you're doing a great job, so continue with good success and great health.
Thank you. Thank you.